Welcome to Unfinished, the channel where I finish the projects that I started. Today I'm going to be working on a thing hand from the show Wednesday. It is a file that I 3D printed from the Hex 3D Patreon. I'll put the link in the description. It's an excellent file. It's super detailed. The stitching on it is incredible. Originally I downloaded this file because my sister, who at the time when I started this little project was I think around 10 years old, she was really into that show and she thought this was going to be super cool. And so I downloaded it and I thought, okay, I'll give this to her and it will also allow me to work on some of my painting skills. At the time I'd been working on a lot of sci-fi ships, so all the painting that I'd done with my airbrushing was mostly masked. It was like straight lines. There was not really any like freehand painting going on. So I thought this would be a cool opportunity to work on something that's a little bit different than I normally work on. I wanted to do skin tones. Skin tones are really hard. This skin tone was actually kind of easy though because it had that sort of Addams Family pale sort of skin look, that sort of dead look to it, so that was pretty cool. I still wanted to get a little bit of realism in there by painting some of the veins underneath the skin so that they would come through, you know, the way that they actually look on your hand. And then the stitching was going to be a lot of fun because that was all going to be hand painting, something that I'm not that good at, or at least I wasn't good at the time. So I wanted to make the stitches look really cool, and they actually did come out really, really well. However, there was some issues with this project, and I will go over what those issues were in a second. This project was a victim of a version of my own inner critic. An inner critic is the voice in your head that critiques the things that you do. Sometimes it belittles the things that you do. It's sort of this negative voice that's always kind of nagging at you and highlighting all of the mistakes that you're making when you're working on something. For me, the inner critic is often feels like it's standing over my shoulder, watching what I'm doing and judging it. And that inner critic changes. The persona of that inner critic changes depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes it might be the person that I'm making it for. If I'm selling it, it could be the prospective audience or the prospective market that I'm selling it to. In this case, it was actually my dad who was my inner critic. Even though I was giving this to my sister, she was 10 at the time and she was still living at home with my dad and stepmom. Now, my dad has spent 30 years in the auto industry as a quality analysis expert. So he's spent his entire life honing this ability to spot imperfections and mistakes, and he's really good at it. So for me, he's kind of like the final boss of whether something I make is good or not. If it passes his spec, then I know I've done a good job. So I knew that when I gave this to her and he was going to see it, that he would spot all of the mistakes I'd made in the project right away. And a lot of them were quite obvious. Now, when I started working on this project, I was really proud of it because there were things that just went really, really well. There were skills that I was working on that I was a lot better at than I expected for, you know, one of the first times I'd sort of done hand painting and done some of these techniques. And the stitching came out really well. I was really proud of it. It looked really realistic. It was super cool. Even the skin tones I was generally pretty proud of. It had that sort of Addams Family vibe. Wasn't realistic like a living person, but it definitely had that sort of like Addams Family dead kind of pale skin tone to it. I'd put the blue underneath the paint so you could actually see the blue veins and the red veins and stuff. It looked really cool. But then I got these black smudges on it and I couldn't get them off. By that time, I didn't remember what my skin tone mixture was, so I would have had to repaint the whole thing to get rid of it. There was those pink smudges on the thumb. The dirt that I tried to put in the knuckles didn't really work out. It just ended up looking like black lines. The nails didn't turn out the way I wanted to. So all these little mistakes just undermined everything that I was proud of in this project. Because the inner critic, this voice that I'd projected onto my dad that was critiquing me, was telling me this isn't good enough, this isn't good enough, it's not going to be good enough, no one's going to think that this is good. And so it stalled the whole project. Even though in reality, my dad would have never done that. He would have never critiqued it in that way. He would have never been negative in that way. He would have just said, wow, that's really cool, good job. But you know, I projected all of my own insecurities and self-criticisms onto this, you know, straw man version of my dad. And that stalled the project for a couple of years. So when I came back to it for this channel, part of finishing it was overcoming that inner critic. Not being so beholden to the expectations that I invent for myself and then project onto this critic, no matter who it is. And it's also just getting better at following through on what I say I'm going to do. So there's two aspects to this, right? I was going to do this for my sister. Even though it is just a piece of painted plastic, it still feels like I let her down because I was going to do it for her and then I never did. So I'm kind of coming through on this, and I'm hoping that a better late than never approach is going to win the day here. So it's overcoming this inner critic and also just following through on the things that I'm going to say I do. Both two major things that cause me to stall on projects and leave projects unfinished. So that's where I'm at. And it looks pretty good, I think. At the end of the day, it ended up turning out really well. There are some mistakes, but at this point, I'm okay with them. I've come to terms with that. I'm really proud of the things that went really well. And there it is. There it is, the finished project. I'm super happy with it. Everything turned out pretty well. The mistakes are still there. They are what they are. I'm just gonna have to live with that. I am still gonna give this to my sister. She's a teenager now. I'm not really sure if she's gonna want it. I'm not sure if she's still interested in it, but I told her I would do it for her, so I'm gonna follow through finally and give it to her. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button below. If you wanna learn about how I did this, the techniques that I used, the paints that I used, how I mixed them up, all that sort of thing, consider checking out my Patreon. It's $3 a month Canadian or $2 USD if that's your jam. And I will be posting videos there regularly about all the projects that I'm working on, detailing how I do them, how I work on them, all the materials that I use, and that sort of thing, some behind the scenes stuff. So please check that out. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. Until next time, cheers.